Sometimes you do not sleep, you prepare for the tests, worry about how you will pass, and then the shelling of your hometown begins, where your parents live, and you no longer worry about exams.
Russia now occupies parts of eastern Ukraine, and for students in those territories, I've been reading about re-education, about Russia essentially rewriting the curriculum. Hey, it's Hannah here. Welcome to What's in the World, your podcast for the stories that get people talking from the BBC World Service. Now, bunkers and bomb shelters are usually for people to hide out in when they're under threat, but in Ukraine, schools are now being built in underground shelters too. Thousands of schools there have been damaged since the war with Russia begun, and these new underground schools are giving children a chance to continue their studies. So today you're going to hear how education has been affected by the war in Ukraine and what it's like studying underground. Let's find out more about this now from BBC reporter Olga Malchevska, who's here with me in the studio. Hi, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on your wonderful program.
Oh, fabulous. So you've been to one of these underground schools. What was it like?
We went to one of the schools in the city of Zaporizhia, which is at the southeast of Ukraine. It is very close to the front line. It looked like a regular school, really, and it just was quite difficult to comprehend that everything is happening underground. And from the outside, it looked just like a football pitch, regular school football pitch. And then you just go down and you see a regular school with amazing studying, with beautiful facilities, with everything equipped to be able to provide the high quality education for children.
And just to bring you up to speed on the situation in Ukraine, Russia invaded more than 3 years ago, back in 2022. And initially, Russian forces captured large parts of Ukraine and nearly made it to the capital, Kyiv. But Ukraine pushed the Russian forces back. And now most of the fighting is in the south and east of the country. And both sides are using loads of drones to attack each other. Thousands and thousands of soldiers have been killed on each side, and thousands of civilians have also died. The UN says it's about 13,500. And until recently, if you were a Ukrainian man between the ages of 18 and 60, you wouldn't have been allowed to leave the country. Now you are able to leave until you turn 23. And men who are between the ages of 25 and 60, they have to join the army. It's known as conscription, and that's unless they have an exemption. So, Olga, how has all of this affected education in Ukraine?
Every time when there is air raids, and they can happen a few times a day in Kyiv, teachers and children have to run down. They have to go outside, which is obviously a risk to be killed, and then they have to go down to the underground facility. And they have less than 10 seconds to do that. So you can imagine the level of stress people are going through. Level of uncertainty.
And I read that, as I said, thousands of schools damaged, hundreds completely destroyed, and children who are, as you say, still going to school, having to run into shelters every time the sirens go off. And what about online learning? Was there a time when children stayed at home because it was safer than going to school?
Yes, absolutely correct. As you're saying, many children had to study online initially, and let's say in that school in Zaporizhia where we were filming, the pupils told me that when they first entered the underground school, they were actually so happy that finally they can study physically in person. Now, speaking about the destroyed schools, I just wanted to give you some numbers if you want to. So according to Ukrainian government, according to the most recent statistics, around 400 educational facilities have been completely destroyed by the Russian bombs and drones. And most of those are schools and nurseries. Now, over 3,500 educational institutions have been damaged severely. So we can get the scale of the destruction.
And Olga, we've been hearing from some students. This is Karina, who's a university student in Ukraine.
The war did not change our years of study, it completely destroyed them. The first 2 years we studied remotely, we did not know what real university life was like at all. The last 2 years we've studied in person, and unfortunately under shelling, under constant attacks, under constant power outages. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and don't know if you'll be able to go to university because the transport can't run due to the difficult situation with the energy sector. Sometimes you do not sleep, you prepare for the tests, worry about how you will pass, and then the shelling of your hometown begins, where your parents live, and you no longer worry about exams. But we still move forward. Our classes continue, we continue to learn, and now I have even passed my most recent exams. It's really hard because there's no electricity. You don't have enough time to prepare. You have constant stress because of the drones flying and air raids, but unfortunately, this has become our reality.
So, Olga, as we heard, education in Ukraine has completely changed. And I want to talk more about these underground schools now, because perhaps for the generation of children, for children who can study there might not be so much disruption to their education.
Those initiatives to build the schools underground are aimed to help those kids at least to catch up somehow with the education, because otherwise we will be facing the situation where the whole generation has been deprived of the education at all. So the school we were filming had a fantastic storage of food and water for a couple of days, and we were told that it was also able to sustain a nuclear blast. That is another reality which Ukraine is preparing for, because Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia where we were filming, is located very close to the nuclear power plant, which is occupied by Russia.
Where in the country have these schools been built, and how many students can go to them?
According to the Ukrainian government data, which we can't verify independently, the BBC, there is an ambitious goal to build 180 underground schools by the end of the 2025.
By the end of this year?
Yes. So we don't know how many of those schools from that number, which is given by the Ukrainian government, means that they would actually build the schools from scratch or repurpose the previous facilities, underground facilities.
Olga, I want to talk about another area where education has changed in Ukraine, because Russia now occupies parts of eastern Ukraine, areas that it invaded during the course of the war. It now controls them. And for students in those territories, I've been reading about re-education, about Russia essentially rewriting the curriculum and the way that children are being taught, changing. What are some of those changes?
Well, that is a very complicated topic, because obviously the BBC crew, we are not allowed to enter the occupied territories, which makes it extremely challenging for us to cover these stories. Now, I managed to speak to a few people on the occupied territories, and I've done a few reports about that. And what I'm saying now is based on what they told me. And what they told me is that, well, their children, or the children who they're witnessing, if they go to school, and they have to go to school, they don't have a choice, obviously, their morning starts with singing the Russian anthem. And if someone rebels, if someone denies singing it, their parents would be called to speak with Russian intelligence service. Ukrainian language is forbidden. By no means anyone can speak Ukrainian. No mentioning of Ukraine as an independent state. They also, what I was told about is that they have been rewriting Ukrainian history, basically changing it dramatically. Now, the teachers who are in occupation, a few of them told me that the majority, what Russian government is also doing on the occupied territories, is they bring Russian teachers from Russia and they install them in Ukrainian schools in the occupied territories, and the school education is being provided by them. And then Ukrainian teachers who, if they stayed in the city, they are allowed to work only if they agree to teach in Russian.
And we've been hearing from someone who went to school in occupied Donetsk. That's a part of Ukraine that was invaded by Russia in 2014 and has mostly been under Russian control since. We're not naming her to protect her.
Our textbooks were replaced by Russian language textbooks. Each year, the hours we spent learning the Ukrainian language and literature were decreased. Closer to 2022, these subjects disappeared. And if we are talking about history, of course, our textbooks were Russian, which logically leads to learning Russian history. Of course, speaking about your true opinion would have been suicide. There were cases when pupils said something about Ukraine and teachers started shouting at them, saying that Ukrainians are Nazis, that Ukrainian kills us, and started to impose their Russian views. It was disgusting to listen to these lies.
So, Olga, we've heard there about how the curriculum is changing in some of these occupied territories, and you mentioned what it was like. What has Russia said in response to that?
Well, Russian side doesn't respond to the BBC's claims, but previously they said many times that they deny, obviously, all the allegations and that they conduct their duties according to the Russian laws.
And I imagine there's a really big impact on children and young people in Ukraine as well, with the death and destruction and trauma of living in a country and uncertainty of living in a country that's at war and not knowing what their future might hold. How is that being addressed in schools?
Well, in that school where we were filming in Zaporizhia underground, they had probably a bit more of breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And for the younger children, they tried to organize some kind of exercises, music. So it was all designed to make it fun, as fun as possible. So they were playing their favorite music and allowing them to dance, encouraging them to dance in the corridors. Obviously, they can't run. You know, it's a problem. Children need to run, and they can't run.
No outdoor spaces.
Yes, they can't have proper PE lesson.
Yeah.
So they are trying to do what they can. So the post-traumatic stress disorder, that is how it's called by psychologists, is a very common thing. And another, I think, horrible thing which they were talking about is that many people in Ukraine even don't realize that they have it at this stage because they are in the conditions of the constant survival. They don't have time to reflect. They just have to carry on. So it has become their new reality. Some young people also told me that they just don't think about it. So their mechanism of coping is not to process that. They just put it aside, and they just, when they hear that someone or their friends is killed or someone that there has been another shelling, they just think, oh, okay, what should I do right now? I have to carry on. I have to do this. I don't believe that they were killed. Maybe I will just see them later.
It is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear that so many young people have to factor this into their everyday existence and survival, and I'm sure there will be a huge impact.
And also, I would say that from what I've been seeing, sometimes Ukrainian children are showing higher motivation to study than what perhaps sometimes I observe here in London, maybe just in my region, and maybe just on the example of my family and friends.
Or maybe they value education really highly because of everything that is going on in their country. And I saw in your report when you went to visit this school how happy the children were to be at school, to be studying.
Absolutely. I was showing that clip to my son when he told me that he doesn't want to go to school. So I was telling him, look, here are Ukrainian children studying under the bombardment in the basement, in the bomb shelter, and they're so happy to be there. And you don't want to go to your beautiful school in London.
Might make you think twice. It might make you think twice next time you don't want to go to school.
Yes.
Olga, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's it from us. But if you want to find out more about the war in Ukraine, there are plenty of articles on the BBC News website, and we've covered it on other episodes of the podcast too. So you can find them wherever you get your BBC podcasts or right here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel. And while you're here, why not give us a like, subscribe, drop us a comment below. We would love to hear from you. I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.